Welcome to Stoic Vivu, where ancient wisdom meets modern life challenges. I'm here to help you discover how timeless Stoic philosophy can transform your daily existence from overwhelming chaos into purposeful clarity. Our mission is simple yet profound. We take the most powerful teachings from history's greatest Stoic masters and show you exactly how to apply them to the real pressures you face every single day. You wake up each morning to the same relentless cycle. Your phone buzzes with notifications before your feet hit the floor. Your closet overflows with clothes you never wear, while your mind overflows with commitments you never wanted. You scroll through social media and feel worse about yourself. You say yes to meetings that accomplish nothing. You carry grudges that drain your energy and pursue possessions that promise happiness but deliver anxiety instead. This isn't just modern life being difficult. This is the exact same human struggle that Marcus Aurelius faced as Roman emperor, that Seneca navigated as advisor to Nero, and that Epictetus overcame despite being born into slavery. The circumstances change, but the fundamental challenge remains identical. How do you create a life of meaning, peace, and genuine fulfillment when everything around you seems designed to pull you in different directions? The answer lies not in complicated systems or expensive solutions, but in 8 simple daily habits that have been tested across 2,000 years of human experience. These aren't modern productivity hacks dressed up in ancient clothing. These are authentic Stoic practices that the masters themselves used to maintain inner peace while managing empires, advising tyrants, and surviving extreme hardship. You're about to discover how Epictetus learned to own less and worry less after losing everything he thought mattered. You'll see how Seneca developed the ability to break any destructive habit in minutes using a method so powerful it still works perfectly today. You'll learn Marcus Aurelius's secret for turning every conflict into personal growth, and his daily practice for cleansing his spirit from the inevitable dust of earthly life. Each habit builds upon the others, creating a complete system for mastering your external circumstances and internal responses. You'll start by decluttering your physical possessions, then move to breaking the mental habits that enslave you. You'll heal damaged relationships, protect your mind from toxic information, and learn to say no like a true Stoic philosopher. Finally, you'll discover daily practices for spiritual cleansing, nature connection, and time mastery that will anchor these changes permanently into your life. These 8 habits require no special equipment, no expensive courses, and no dramatic lifestyle overhauls. They work whether you live in a studio apartment in Manhattan or a suburban house in Phoenix. They're designed for busy people who need practical wisdom, not philosophical theory. By the end of this video, you'll have a complete blueprint for transforming your life using the exact same principles that helped the greatest minds in history navigate their challenges with grace, wisdom, and unshakable inner peace. Let's begin this journey together. Habit 1. Own less, worry less, your daily freedom practice. You're rushing through your morning routine when you realize you can't find your favorite shirt. You tear through your overstuffed closet, pushing aside clothes you haven't worn in months, searching through piles of items that somehow accumulated without your conscious decision. 20 minutes later, you're running late, frustrated, and wearing something that makes you feel less confident. This scene repeats itself throughout your home with keys, documents, gadgets, and countless possessions that were supposed to make life easier, but instead create daily stress and confusion. This overwhelming relationship with our stuff isn't a modern invention. 2,000 years ago, Epictetus understood this struggle intimately. Born into slavery, he eventually gained his freedom and built a modest but comfortable life for himself. Among his few prized possessions was a beautiful iron lamp that he kept burning in a shrine within his home. This lamp represented more than mere illumination. It symbolized his hard-earned freedom, his taste for finer things, and his success in creating beauty within his personal space. One morning, Epictetus heard suspicious noises from another room. He rushed to investigate and discovered a thief fleeing with his precious lamp. Like anyone who has been robbed, he felt violated, angry, and disappointed. Someone had invaded his sanctuary and stolen something meaningful to him. The natural human response is to feel victimized by such circumstances, to focus on the injustice and the loss of what rightfully belonged to us. But Epictetus caught himself in this emotional spiral and applied Stoic wisdom to transform his perspective completely. He told himself, "Tomorrow I will go to the market and purchase an earthenware lamp instead." This wasn't resignation or defeat. This was profound philosophical insight in action. He realized that the real problem wasn't the thief, although theft is certainly wrong. The deeper issue was that he had owned something so valuable it was worth stealing, something that made him vulnerable to exactly this kind of violation and emotional turmoil. Epictetus understood a principle that Seneca would later articulate perfectly. A man can only lose what he has. The attachment to possessions creates the very vulnerability that causes our suffering. When we own things we're afraid to lose, we become mentally enslaved by those possessions. We worry about damage, theft, loss, and replacement. We spend mental energy protecting, maintaining, and securing our stuff instead of focusing on what truly matters in life. Seneca expanded this insight through his powerful metaphor about slavery and ownership. He observed that wealthy Romans with enormous estates and countless slaves were actually enslaved by their property rather than being liberated by it. These supposed masters lived in constant anxiety about managing their possessions, protecting their wealth, and maintaining their lifestyle. They had become prisoners of their own success, unable to travel freely, think independently, or act spontaneously because they were perpetually concerned about their material holdings. This is why Seneca regularly practiced voluntary poverty, deliberately choosing simpler possessions and experiences to maintain his psychological freedom. He would sleep on the floor, eat simple foods, and wear basic clothing to remind himself that luxury, while pleasant, was not necessary for happiness or dignity. Through these practices, he could ask himself honestly, is this what I'm afraid of ending up with? It's really not so bad. You can apply this same wisdom immediately by starting with one simple daily practice. Each morning, identify one possession in your living space that you don't actually need or use. This might be a gadget gathering dust in a drawer, clothing that no longer fits your lifestyle, books you'll never read again, or decorative items that create visual clutter without adding genuine beauty to your environment. The key is not to create arbitrary rules about what you should or shouldn't own. Instead, develop awareness about which possessions serve your life and which possessions demand service from you. Ask yourself honest questions about each item. Does this add genuine value to my daily experience? Do I feel anxious about losing, breaking, or replacing this? Am I keeping this because I actually use it or because I think I should want it? When you identify something to release, you have several options that can actually multiply the positive impact of this practice. You can donate useful items to people who will genuinely benefit from them. You can sell things that have monetary value and use the proceeds for experiences or causes you care about. You can simply discard items that have reached the end of their useful life. The specific method matters less than the act of consciously choosing what deserves space in your environment and attention in your mind. This daily practice creates a cascading effect throughout your life. As you reduce the number of possessions competing for your attention, you'll find yourself spending less time managing, organizing, cleaning, and worrying about your stuff. Your living space becomes more peaceful and functional. Your mind feels clearer and more focused. You develop confidence in your ability to live well with less, which reduces anxiety about financial security and material loss. Most importantly, you begin to understand the profound difference between owning things and being owned by them. True wealth isn't measured by the number or value of your possessions, but by your freedom to choose what role material goods play in your pursuit of a meaningful life. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself in his personal journal, the goal is not to eliminate all possessions, but to maintain a proper perspective about their true importance. When you own less, you worry less, and when you worry less, you discover the spaciousness and peace that come from focusing your energy on what actually matters. Your character, your relationships, your contributions, and your growth as a human being. Ultimately, this first habit establishes the foundation for all the others by teaching you that real security comes not from what you can accumulate, but from what you can live without while still maintaining your dignity, purpose, and joy. Habit 2. Break any habit in minutes. The Stoic method that works. You're sitting at your desk in the middle of a productive afternoon when suddenly you feel an overwhelming urge to check your phone. You weren't thinking about social media or expecting any important messages, but your hand moves toward the device almost automatically. This impulse feels stronger than your rational mind, as if some invisible force is compelling you to interrupt your focus and dive into the endless scroll of digital distractions. You pause for a moment, recognizing this familiar internal tug-of-war between what you want to do and what you feel driven to do. This experience reveals something profound about human nature that the ancient Stoics understood with remarkable clarity. We like to believe we're in complete control of our actions, but honest self-examination reveals that many of our daily behaviors operate more like automatic programs than conscious choices. These patterns can range from relatively harmless habits like checking our phones compulsively to more serious dependencies on substances, behaviors, or thought patterns that genuinely undermine our well-being and freedom. The brilliant physicist Richard Feynman discovered this reality about himself in a moment of startling self-awareness. He was rushing between classes at the university when he suddenly felt an intense craving for alcohol. This wasn't during a social occasion or after a stressful day. The desire simply appeared in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, completely unrelated to any external trigger or emotional state. What shocked Feynman wasn't the craving itself, but the recognition of how powerful and autonomous this impulse felt within his own mind. Feynman realized in that instant that alcohol had developed a kind of authority over his decision-making process that he had never consciously granted. He wasn't an alcoholic in the clinical sense, but he could clearly see how this substance had begun to influence his thoughts and desires without his permission. Rather than rationalize this away or minimize its significance, he made an immediate decision that would demonstrate the power of Stoic principles in action. He quit drinking completely that very day without gradual reduction or elaborate preparation. President Dwight Eisenhower faced a similar moment of truth with his smoking habit. For decades, he had been consuming 4 packs of cigarettes daily, a dependency that had become so normalized he rarely questioned it. When his doctor informed him that his health was in serious jeopardy and that continued smoking could end his life prematurely, Eisenhower didn't negotiate or bargain for a middle ground. He didn't try to cut back gradually or switch to a supposedly safer alternative. Instead, he gave himself what he called the order to quit smoking and stopped immediately. Both men understood intuitively what Epictetus taught explicitly about the nature of freedom and slavery. In his teachings, Epictetus explained that we can become enslaved to anything that has the power to compel our behavior against our better judgment. This slavery doesn't require physical chains or external force. It operates through our own minds when we lose what he called the freedom to abstain from actions that don't serve our highest good. Seneca described this phenomenon as a form of mental and spiritual bondage that undermines all other freedoms. He observed that a person might be politically free, financially independent, and socially respected, yet still live as a slave to impulses, substances, or habits that command their attention and energy. These internal masters are often more tyrannical than external ones because they operate from within our own consciousness, making their demands feel like our own desires. The Stoic method for breaking any habit operates on a principle that modern psychology has validated but ancient wisdom understood long before scientific research confirmed it. The key insight is that habits maintain their power primarily through our unconscious acceptance of their inevitability. When we believe that a craving or impulse must be satisfied, we surrender our agency before we even begin to resist. The first step in the Stoic method involves developing what Marcus Aurelius called the discipline of desire. This means learning to observe your urges and impulses with curiosity rather than immediately acting on them. When you feel the familiar pull toward your habitual behavior, pause and examine the sensation itself. Notice how it feels in your body, what thoughts accompany it, and how it attempts to convince you that satisfaction is necessary or urgent. This observation creates crucial space between the impulse and your response. In that space, you can ask yourself essential questions that restore your conscious choice. Is this desire serving my true well-being or working against it? Am I choosing this action because it aligns with my values, or am I being driven by a pattern that has developed its own momentum? What would happen if I simply allowed this feeling to exist without feeding it through action? The second step involves what Epictetus taught about the dichotomy of control. You cannot control whether cravings or impulses arise in your mind. These feelings are part of the human experience and will continue to appear regardless of your preferences. However, you have complete control over your response to these internal experiences. You can choose to act on an impulse, or you can choose to let it pass through your awareness without giving it power over your behavior. The third step requires understanding that the discomfort of not satisfying a habitual urge is temporary and manageable, while the consequences of continuing destructive patterns compound over time. Seneca taught that we often suffer more in imagination than in reality. The anticipation of withdrawal, social awkwardness, or missing out on pleasure is usually far worse than the actual experience of choosing differently. The final step involves replacing the identity and story that supported your old habit with a new understanding of yourself as someone who has genuine choice in all circumstances. Instead of saying, "I'm trying to quit," or "I can't have that," you begin to think, "I don't do that," or "that's not who I am anymore." This shift in self-concept aligns your habits with your values rather than fighting against ingrained patterns. Therefore, the Stoic method for breaking habits isn't about willpower or gradual modification. It's about recognizing that you have always possessed the freedom to choose your actions, even when that freedom felt hidden beneath layers of automatic behavior. The moment you truly understand this freedom, you can exercise it immediately and completely, just as Feynman and Eisenhower demonstrated through their decisive action. Habit 3. Turn every conflict into personal growth. You're walking into the office on Monday morning when you spot that coworker approaching, the one who undermined your project in last week's meeting. Your stomach tightens as memories flood back of their dismissive comments and the way they took credit for your ideas. You feel your jaw clench and your shoulders tense as you prepare for another uncomfortable interaction. This person seems to bring out the worst in you, and every encounter feels like a battle you either win or lose. The grudge you're carrying has become like a heavy backpack you wear everywhere, consuming mental energy and poisoning your mood even when they're nowhere around. These relationship conflicts aren't just workplace annoyances or minor social friction. They represent some of the heaviest burdens we carry through life, weighing down our spirits and corrupting our peace of mind. The ancient Stoics understood that unresolved interpersonal tensions create a unique form of suffering because they keep us psychologically tethered to people and situations that we'd rather forget. Every time we replay these conflicts in our minds, we give other people power over our emotional state and mental freedom. Marcus Aurelius faced this challenge on an enormous scale as Roman emperor. He dealt with senators who opposed his policies, military commanders who questioned his strategies, and family members who disappointed his expectations. Rather than allowing these relationships to embitter him or consume his thoughts, he developed a profound approach to conflict that transformed his understanding of human nature and his own character development. In his personal journal, Marcus wrote extensively about the principle that true revenge consists of not becoming like the person who wronged you. This insight cuts to the heart of why carrying grudges ultimately harms us more than the people we resent. When we remain angry, bitter, or vindictive, we allow other people's worst qualities to take root within our own character. We become prisoners of their behavior, reacting to their choices instead of acting from our own values and wisdom. Seneca expanded this understanding through his teachings about anger as a temporary form of madness that clouds our judgment and distorts our perception. He observed that when we're consumed by resentment toward someone, we essentially hand them control over our emotional state. They can influence our mood, disrupt our peace, and determine our mental focus without even being present. This gives them tremendous power over us while providing no benefit to our own well-being or personal development. The Stoic approach to resolving conflicts begins with a fundamental shift in perspective about what these challenging relationships actually represent. Instead of viewing difficult people as obstacles to our happiness or enemies to be defeated, we can learn to see them as teachers who reveal important truths about our own character and provide opportunities for practicing virtue under pressure. When someone treats you unfairly, dismisses your contributions, or betrays your trust, they're creating a laboratory for testing your commitment to your own principles. You can choose to respond with wisdom, compassion, and integrity, or you can allow their behavior to trigger reactions that compromise your own character. The conflict becomes less about winning or losing against them and more about discovering what kind of person you want to be when faced with challenging circumstances. The practical implementation of this habit begins with taking complete responsibility for your own role in any interpersonal conflict, regardless of how the other person has behaved. This doesn't mean accepting blame for things you didn't do or excusing harmful behavior from others. It means focusing exclusively on the aspects of the situation that are within your control: your actions, your words, your attitudes, and your responses. You start by honestly examining your own contribution to the conflict. Did you communicate clearly about your expectations and boundaries? Did you respond to their behavior in ways that escalated tensions rather than resolving them? Are you holding them to standards that you haven't clearly expressed? Have your own insecurities or defensive reactions made the situation worse than it needed to be? This self-examination often reveals that even when someone else initiated the conflict or behaved badly, your responses have played a role in perpetuating this cycle of tension. You might discover that your pride prevented you from addressing issues directly, that your assumptions about their motivations were incorrect, or that your communication style contributed to misunderstandings. The next step involves what Marcus Aurelius called the practice of sympathia, which means recognizing the fundamental interconnectedness of all human experience. This person who seems like your enemy is struggling with their own fears, insecurities, and limitations just like you are. Their difficult behavior often stems from pain, confusion, or inadequacy rather than malicious intent. Understanding this doesn't excuse their actions, but it helps you respond from a place of strength and clarity rather than reactive emotion. Once you've examined your own role and developed compassion for their human struggle, you can take concrete action to heal the relationship. This might involve offering a sincere apology for your part in the conflict, even if you believe their behavior was worse than yours. It could mean having an honest conversation about how to work together more effectively in the future. Sometimes it means simply changing your own behavior and attitude without requiring any response from them. The most powerful aspect of this practice is that it works regardless of how the other person responds to your efforts. If they accept your apology and work toward resolution, you've helped heal a damaged relationship and created the possibility for future collaboration. If they reject your outreach and continue their difficult behavior, you've still freed yourself from the burden of carrying resentment and demonstrated your commitment to living according to your values. Marcus Aurelius understood that we cannot control other people's choices, reactions, or character development. We can only control our own responses and ensure that we're not perpetuating cycles of conflict through our own actions and attitudes. When we focus on being the kind of person we respect, regardless of how others behave, we transform every interpersonal challenge into an opportunity for personal growth and character development. Essentially, this habit teaches us that conflicts are not interruptions to our spiritual development but essential components of it. The people who trigger our strongest reactions are often our greatest teachers, showing us exactly where we need to grow in patience, compassion, and wisdom. By embracing this perspective, we can turn every difficult relationship into a catalyst for becoming the person we're meant to be. Habit 4. Protect your mind from digital chaos daily. You're enjoying a peaceful morning coffee when you decide to quickly check your phone for the weather forecast. 30 minutes later, you emerge from a digital rabbit hole feeling anxious, overwhelmed, and somehow angry about political events happening thousands of miles away from your actual life. Your mind, which started the day clear and focused, now buzzes with fragments of celebrity gossip, disaster headlines, argumentative social media posts, and advertisements for products you don't need. You can't quite remember how you ended up reading about a controversy involving people you've never met, but somehow this information now occupies valuable mental real estate that you had planned to use for your own priorities and goals. This experience reveals a fundamental truth about modern life that would have been immediately recognizable to the ancient Stoics, even though they lived 2 millennia before smartphones and social media existed. They understood that our mental state is largely determined by the quality of information and influences we allow into our consciousness. Just as our physical health depends on the food we consume, our psychological well-being depends on the mental diet we choose through our daily information consumption habits. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively in his personal journal about the importance of not being bounced around by gossip. As Roman emperor, he was constantly surrounded by people who wanted to share rumors, complaints, political intrigue, and dramatic stories about conflicts happening throughout the empire. He recognized that allowing his mind to become preoccupied with this constant stream of information would prevent him from focusing on his actual responsibilities and maintaining the inner tranquility necessary for wise decision-making. The emperor developed a sophisticated understanding of how information affects consciousness. He observed that when we fill our minds with stories about events we cannot influence, we create artificial stress and anxiety that serves no constructive purpose. When we absorb other people's anger, fear, and negativity through their complaints and dramatic narratives, we essentially contaminate our own emotional state with problems that aren't actually ours to solve. Seneca approached this same challenge through his teachings about choosing our companions and influences carefully. He understood that we become like the people we spend time with and the ideas we regularly encounter. If we surround ourselves with complainers, pessimists, and people who focus primarily on what's wrong with the world, we will inevitably adopt similar thought patterns and emotional habits. Conversely, if we deliberately seek out wisdom, constructive perspectives, and people who embody the qualities we want to develop, we naturally begin to think and feel more like them. In our digital age, this ancient wisdom becomes even more relevant because we now have unprecedented access to both the best and worst of human thought and expression. Every day, we can choose to read the insights of history's greatest philosophers, or we can consume an endless stream of outrage, gossip, and manufactured controversy. We can learn from people who have spent decades developing expertise in subjects that interest us, or we can get distracted by the uninformed opinions of strangers who happen to capture our attention through sensational headlines. The Stoic approach to managing your information diet begins with developing conscious awareness of how different types of content affect your mental state and behavior. Pay attention to how you feel after checking various social media platforms, news websites, or entertainment sources. Notice whether these activities leave you feeling informed and inspired, or anxious and scattered. Observe how your mood, energy level, and ability to focus change based on what you've been reading, watching, or listening to throughout the day. This awareness allows you to make intentional choices about which information sources deserve regular access to your mind. Instead of passively consuming whatever content algorithms decide to show you, you can actively curate your information environment to support your goals, values, and mental well-being. This might mean unfollowing social media accounts that consistently trigger negative emotions, even if they belong to people you know personally. It could involve replacing news websites that focus on outrage and conflict with sources that provide thoughtful analysis and constructive perspectives. The practice extends beyond digital media to include the conversations and relationships in your daily life. Marcus Aurelius recognized that some people consistently bring drama, complaints, and negativity into every interaction, while others contribute wisdom, encouragement, and constructive energy. You can choose to limit your exposure to toxic personalities while seeking out relationships with people who inspire you to become better than you currently are. Implementing this habit requires setting clear boundaries around when, where, and how you consume information. This might involve establishing specific times for checking news and social media, rather than allowing these activities to interrupt your day randomly. You could create physical boundaries by keeping your phone in another room during meals, work sessions, or family time. Many people find it helpful to avoid consuming any digital media for the first hour after waking up or the last hour before sleep, protecting these crucial periods for reflection, planning, and peaceful transition. The goal isn't to become uninformed or disconnected from the world around you. The Stoics valued knowledge and engagement with their communities. However, they distinguished between information that genuinely helps you understand important issues and make better decisions versus content that simply fills your mind with other people's emotions and opinions without providing any constructive value. Seneca taught that we should be as selective about our mental inputs as we are about our food. Just as you wouldn't deliberately consume spoiled or poisonous food, you shouldn't deliberately consume information that corrupts your thinking or damages your emotional equilibrium. This doesn't mean avoiding all challenging or uncomfortable information, but it does mean being intentional about the proportion of constructive versus destructive content you allow into your consciousness. Building on this foundation, you can actively seek out sources of wisdom, beauty, and inspiration that nourish your mind and support your personal development. This might include reading books by thoughtful authors, listening to podcasts that explore meaningful topics in depth, or following people who consistently share insights that help you think more clearly about important questions. Consequently, protecting your mind from digital chaos becomes a daily practice of conscious choice-making about the information and influences you allow to shape your thoughts, emotions, and ultimately your character. By taking control of your information diet, you reclaim your mental freedom and create space for the kind of thinking that leads to genuine wisdom and lasting peace. Habit 5. Say no like a Stoic. Guard your essential time. You're finally making progress on an important project when your phone buzzes with a text from a colleague asking if you can quickly jump on a call to discuss something that could easily be handled through email. Your calendar already shows back-to-back meetings for the rest of the week. Your to-do list keeps growing faster than you can check items off, and you haven't had an uninterrupted hour to focus on your most meaningful work in days. Yet you feel an almost automatic impulse to respond, "Sure, no problem," because saying no feels rude, selfish, or unprofessional. Meanwhile, your stress levels climb higher as you realize you're constantly available to everyone else's priorities, while your own goals remain perpetually pushed to tomorrow. This scenario captures one of the most widespread challenges of modern life, and one that the ancient Stoics understood with remarkable clarity. We live in a world that offers us endless opportunities, requests, invitations, and demands on our time and attention. Without clear principles for deciding what deserves our precious hours and energy, we end up living reactive lives where other people's agendas consistently take priority over our own values and aspirations. Marcus Aurelius faced this challenge on an unprecedented scale as ruler of the Roman Empire. Every day brought urgent requests from senators, military commanders, provincial governors, and citizens who all believed their particular needs deserved the emperor's immediate attention. If he had tried to accommodate every request and respond to every demand, he would have spent his entire reign in a state of frantic busyness without ever addressing the most important challenges facing the empire or developing his own philosophical understanding. Instead, Marcus developed what became one of the most powerful frameworks in Stoic philosophy for making decisions about how to spend our limited time on Earth. He taught himself to ask a single essential question about every opportunity or request that came his way. Is this thing essential? This simple inquiry cut through all the secondary considerations, social pressures, and emotional manipulations that typically cloud our judgment when we're trying to decide how to allocate our time and energy. The emperor understood that most of what we do and say throughout our days is not actually essential to our happiness, our relationships, our work, or our personal development. Much of our activity consists of habits, social obligations, busy work, and reactive responses to other people's priorities. While some of these activities might be pleasant or socially expected, they don't contribute meaningfully to what Marcus called the art of living, or what we might today describe as creating a purposeful and fulfilling existence. Seneca approached this same challenge through his profound insights about the relationship between saying yes and saying no. He observed that every time we agree to one thing, we are automatically declining countless other possibilities. When we say yes to a meeting that could have been an email, we're saying no to focused work time, family connection, personal reflection, or physical exercise. When we agree to social obligations that don't genuinely interest us, we're declining opportunities to pursue activities that align with our deeper values and aspirations. This understanding transforms the act of saying no from a negative or selfish behavior into a positive affirmation of what matters most to us. Seneca taught that people who cannot say no to non-essential requests are essentially allowing other people to make the most important decisions about how their lives unfold. They surrender their agency and autonomy by default, then wonder why they feel overwhelmed, unfulfilled, and disconnected from their own goals and values. The Stoic method for saying no begins with developing a crystal clear awareness of what you consider truly essential in your life right now. This requires honest reflection about your core values, your most important relationships, your primary responsibilities, and your meaningful long-term goals. Without this clarity, you'll find yourself making decisions based on momentary emotions, social pressure, or the desire to avoid potential conflict rather than on what actually serves your deepest priorities. Once you understand what's essential to you, the process of evaluating requests becomes much simpler. When someone asks for your time, attention, or energy, you can quickly assess whether their request aligns with your essential priorities or competes with them for your limited resources. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or refusing to help others, but it does mean being strategic about when, how, and to whom you offer your assistance. The actual practice of saying no requires understanding that it is, as many wise people have observed, a complete sentence. You don't need to provide elaborate justifications, detailed explanations, or lengthy apologies when you decline a request that doesn't serve your essential priorities. Over-explaining your decisions often invites negotiation, argument, or guilt-tripping that can undermine your resolve and waste additional time and emotional energy. A simple, respectful response like, "I won't be able to do that," or "that doesn't work for my schedule," communicates your decision clearly without opening the door for extended discussion about your reasoning. If you want to soften the message, you can add something like, "I hope you find someone who can help," or "thanks for thinking of me." But the core message remains clear and non-negotiable. Marcus Aurelius recognized that learning to say no effectively requires developing what he called the discipline of action, which means making conscious choices about how to spend your time rather than simply reacting to whatever demands appear in front of you. This discipline involves planning your days and weeks around your essential priorities first, then considering what additional activities you might accommodate without compromising your primary commitments. This approach often means scheduling time for your most important work, relationships, and personal development before you even consider other people's requests. When your calendar already reflects your essential priorities, it becomes much easier to evaluate new opportunities honestly and decline those that would require you to sacrifice what matters most to you. Seneca warned against what he called the love of busyness, which he described as a form of mental restlessness that keeps us constantly active without ever accomplishing anything meaningful. People who are addicted to busyness often mistake activity for productivity and confuse being needed by others with being valuable or important. They fill their schedules with meetings, calls, social obligations, and reactive tasks, while neglecting the focused, sustained effort required for genuine achievement and personal growth. In essence, saying no like a Stoic means recognizing that your time and energy are your most precious resources, deserving the same careful consideration you would give to spending your money or choosing your closest relationships. By learning to decline non-essential requests gracefully but firmly, you create space for the essential activities that actually contribute to a life worth living. Habit 6. Cleanse your spirit every single day. You collapse into bed after another demanding day, your mind still racing with fragments of conversations, unfinished tasks, and emotional residue from challenging interactions. Your body feels physically tired, but your thoughts continue churning through the day's events, replaying moments when you felt frustrated, analyzing decisions you made, and rehearsing conversations you wish you had handled differently. Despite your exhaustion, sleep feels elusive because your consciousness remains cluttered with the psychological dust and debris that accumulates during any normal day of living, working, and engaging with the complexities of human relationships and modern responsibilities. This mental and spiritual contamination is as inevitable as physical dirt on our clothes or dust on our furniture. Marcus Aurelius understood this reality deeply, writing in his personal journal about the necessity of regularly washing away what he called the dust of earthly life. The emperor recognized that engaging with the world, no matter how carefully or mindfully we approach it, necessarily involves exposure to stress, conflict, negativity, and the various forms of psychological grime that cling to our consciousness throughout our daily experiences. Just as we would never consider going weeks without bathing our bodies or cleaning our living spaces, the Stoics understood that we need consistent practices for cleansing our minds and spirits from the accumulated mental debris of ordinary life. This insight becomes even more critical in our current era, where we're exposed to vastly more information, stimulation, and emotional content than any previous generation in human history has ever experienced. Marcus developed his practice of spiritual cleansing primarily through what we now recognize as one of history's most profound examples of journaling for personal development. His meditations weren't intended for publication but served as his private laboratory for processing his thoughts, emotions, and experiences through the lens of Stoic philosophy. Each evening, he would reflect on the day's events, examine his responses to various challenges, and remind himself of the principles that guided his decision-making and character development. This daily writing practice served multiple essential functions in his spiritual hygiene routine. First, It provided a structured opportunity to identify and examine the emotional reactions, judgments, and mental patterns that had emerged during the day. Rather than allowing these thoughts and feelings to accumulate unconsciously in his psyche, he brought them into the light of conscious awareness, where he could evaluate them clearly and decide which ones deserved his continued attention. Second, his journaling practice allowed him to reconnect with his core values and philosophical principles after a day of navigating complex political, military, and personal challenges. By regularly reviewing Stoic teachings and applying them to his specific circumstances, he could maintain his moral compass and emotional equilibrium despite the tremendous pressures and responsibilities of leadership. Seneca developed a similar but slightly different approach to daily spiritual cleansing through what he called the practice of self-examination. Each night before sleep, he would conduct a thorough review of his thoughts, words, and actions from the day, not for the purpose of self-criticism or guilt, but to identify patterns, learn from his experiences, and make conscious adjustments to his behavior and attitudes going forward. Seneca described this practice as holding court with himself, where he served as both the prosecutor and the defense attorney, examining his conduct with the same rigor he would apply to an important legal case. This wasn't about perfectionism or harsh self-judgment, but about maintaining conscious awareness of his character development and ensuring that his daily actions aligned with his philosophical commitments and personal values. Epictetus contributed to this understanding of spiritual hygiene through his teachings about the importance of morning preparation and evening reflection as bookends to each day. He taught that we should begin each morning by mentally preparing ourselves for the challenges we're likely to encounter, reminding ourselves of Stoic principles, and setting clear intentions about how we want to respond to whatever circumstances arise. This morning practice serves as a form of spiritual armor, protecting our peace of mind and character throughout the day. The evening component of Epictetus's approach involved reviewing how well we lived up to our morning intentions, celebrating moments when we successfully applied Stoic wisdom, and learning from situations where we allowed external circumstances to disturb our inner tranquility. This daily cycle of preparation and review creates a continuous process of spiritual refinement and character development. Modern practitioners can adapt these ancient practices to fit contemporary lifestyles and personal preferences. The essential element isn't the specific format or duration of your daily cleansing ritual, but the consistent commitment to processing your experiences consciously rather than allowing them to accumulate unconsciously in your psyche. Some people find that 10 minutes of evening journaling helps them clear their minds and prepare for restful sleep. Others prefer morning meditation, prayer, or reflective walking as their primary spiritual cleansing practice. Many discover that physical activities like swimming, running, or yoga serve dual purposes, cleansing both body and spirit simultaneously through the meditative quality of repetitive movement and focused breathing. The key insight from Stoic practice is that spiritual cleansing works best when it becomes as routine and non-negotiable as physical hygiene. Just as you wouldn't skip brushing your teeth or washing your hands because you felt too busy or tired, effective spiritual hygiene requires establishing a daily practice that persists regardless of your schedule, mood, or energy level. Marcus Aurelius often combined his reflective practice with what he described as looking up at the stars, using the vastness of the cosmos to gain perspective on his daily concerns and reconnect with the larger patterns and purposes that gave meaning to his individual existence. This combination of introspective examination with cosmic perspective helped him maintain both self-awareness and humility, preventing him from becoming either too absorbed in minor details or too disconnected from his immediate responsibilities. Ultimately, daily spiritual cleansing creates a foundation of inner clarity and emotional stability that supports all other aspects of personal development and life satisfaction. When you consistently process your experiences, emotions, and thoughts through conscious reflection and philosophical examination, you prevent the accumulation of psychological debris that can cloud your judgment, drain your energy, and undermine your peace of mind over time. Habit 7. Find instant peace through nature connection. You step outside your office building during lunch break, overwhelmed by deadlines and interpersonal tensions from the morning's meetings. The city sidewalk bustles with hurried pedestrians, car horns honk in traffic, and the concrete landscape stretches endlessly in every direction. But then you notice a small park across the street where trees provide shade over a few benches, and something inside you yearns for that green space. 5 minutes later, you're sitting under those branches, watching leaves flutter in the breeze, and feeling a profound shift in your mental state that seems almost magical in its immediacy and completeness. This transformation reveals something fundamental about human nature that the ancient Stoics understood with remarkable depth. Despite all our technological advancements and urban sophistication, we remain deeply connected to the natural world at a psychological and spiritual level. When we immerse ourselves in natural environments, even briefly, we often experience what feels like a homecoming to our truest selves, free from the artificial pressures and complexities that characterize so much of modern existence. Marcus Aurelius demonstrated this understanding throughout his personal writings, which are filled with detailed observations of natural phenomena that clearly brought him both pleasure and philosophical insight. He wrote poetically about grain bending under its own ripeness, about the furrowed brow of a lion, about foam flecking from a boar's mouth, and about olives falling perfectly ripe from their branches. These weren't casual observations, but deliberate practices of attention that helped him maintain perspective and inner peace during the tremendous challenges of governing an empire. The emperor understood that engaging with natural beauty served multiple essential functions in his spiritual and psychological development. First, it provided immediate relief from the mental strain of dealing with political conflicts, administrative decisions, and human dramas that filled most of his waking hours. Nature offered him a refuge where he could temporarily step away from human complexity and reconnect with simpler, more fundamental rhythms and patterns. Second, observing natural processes helped Marcus develop what Stoics call a cosmic perspective, the ability to see his personal concerns and challenges within the larger context of universal patterns and eternal cycles. When he watched seasons changing, animals following their instincts, or celestial movements across the night sky, he could remember that his individual struggles, while important to him personally, were part of much larger flows of existence that had been continuing long before his birth and would continue long after his death. Seneca expanded this understanding through his description of natural environments as temples of the divine, places where we can experience what he considered the sacred dimension of existence most directly and powerfully. Unlike human-built structures that reflect our own designs and purposes, natural settings connect us with forces and intelligences that operate according to principles far greater and more mysterious than our individual minds can fully comprehend. This connection with something larger than ourselves serves a crucial psychological function that modern research has validated but ancient wisdom understood intuitively. When we feel overwhelmed by personal problems, work stress, or relationship conflicts, Spending time in natural environments helps restore what psychologists now call attention restoration, and what the Stoics would have described as proper perspective on the relative importance of our concerns. The Japanese concept of forest bathing, which translates as taking in the forest atmosphere, captures this same insight about the healing power of natural immersion. This practice involves deliberately slowing down, opening your senses fully to your natural surroundings, and allowing yourself to be present with trees, plants, earth, and sky without any agenda beyond simple appreciation and connection. You don't need access to wilderness areas or extensive natural preserves to benefit from this practice. Even small urban parks, tree-lined streets, rooftop gardens, or views of the sky through windows can provide significant restoration when approached with conscious attention and appreciation. The key insight is not about the quantity of nature available to you, but about the quality of presence and openness you bring to whatever natural elements exist in your environment. Marcus Aurelius often combined his nature observation with what he called washing away the dust of earthly life by looking up at the stars. This practice of cosmic contemplation helped him remember his place in the vast universe while simultaneously reconnecting with the wonder and humility that come from recognizing how much beauty and mystery exist beyond our human concerns and control. The practical implementation of this habit involves developing daily practices that connect you with natural elements, regardless of your living situation or schedule constraints. This might mean taking short walks outside during work breaks, eating lunch in a park rather than at your desk, or simply spending a few minutes each morning or evening observing the sky, weather patterns, or whatever plants and animals share your environment. Even in heavily urban environments, you can often find surprising pockets of natural beauty and wildness if you look for them intentionally. Many cities have rivers, lakes, or waterfront areas that provide access to natural rhythms and broader perspectives. Most urban areas include parks, botanical gardens, or nature preserves within reasonable traveling distance for weekend or holiday visits. The deeper principle involves cultivating what Seneca called sympathetic attention to the natural world, which means learning to notice and appreciate the intricate beauty and wisdom present in natural processes and cycles. This might involve observing how plants adapt to changing seasons, how animals demonstrate perfect presence and authenticity in their behavior, or how weather patterns reflect larger atmospheric forces that connect your immediate location with global systems. Pierre Haddot, one of the most insightful modern translators and interpreters of Stoic philosophy, wrote about spiritual exercises that involve experiencing what he called oceanic feelings or experiences of immensity when contemplating natural phenomena. These moments help us feel simultaneously very small within the cosmic order and very connected to something much larger and more significant than our individual lives and concerns. Therefore, developing a daily practice of nature connection becomes both a source of immediate stress relief and a pathway to the kind of perspective and wisdom that the Stoics considered essential for living well. By regularly immersing yourself in natural beauty and allowing yourself to be restored by forces beyond human creation, you develop resilience, humility, and the kind of deep peace that comes from remembering your place in the larger patterns of existence. Habit 8. Master your hours. Master your life. You check your phone at the end of another busy day and discover you spent 3 hours scrolling through social media, 45 minutes in a commute that used to take 20 minutes, and an hour watching videos that you can barely remember. Meanwhile, the book you've been meaning to read sits untouched on your nightstand. The creative project you're passionate about remains exactly where you left it weeks ago. and you haven't had a meaningful conversation with someone you care about in days. Time seems to slip through your fingers like water, leaving you wondering where your life actually went and why you feel so disconnected from your own priorities and dreams. This experience of time scarcity paired with time waste represents one of the most profound paradoxes of human existence, and one that the ancient Stoics understood with extraordinary clarity. Seneca wrote an entire treatise called On the Shortness of Life, where he argued that life isn't actually short, but that we waste enormous portions of it on activities that contribute nothing meaningful to our happiness, growth, or purpose. He observed that people who complain about not having enough time are usually the same people who squander their hours on trivial pursuits, reactive behaviors, and mindless habits. Marcus Aurelius approached this challenge through his practice of memento mori, which means remember death in Latin. This wasn't a morbid obsession with mortality, but a practical technique for maintaining awareness of how precious and limited our time on Earth really is. When we truly internalize the reality that our days are numbered and that we don't know how many we have remaining, we naturally become more selective about how we choose to spend our precious hours. The emperor would regularly remind himself that every moment spent on frivolous activities or negative emotions was a moment he could never recover or use for something more meaningful. This awareness didn't make him anxious or stressed about time, but rather helped him make conscious choices about his priorities and focus his energy on activities that aligned with his deepest values and most important responsibilities. Seneca expanded this understanding through his insight that we often treat time as if it were unlimited while treating money as if it were scarce, when the opposite relationship would serve us much better. He observed that people who would never dream of wasting money carelessly will waste hours and days without any apparent concern for what they're losing. Time, unlike money, can never be earned back, saved for later use, or recovered once it's gone. This perspective transforms how we evaluate the activities and commitments that fill our days. Instead of asking whether something costs too much money, we learn to ask whether it's worth the irreplaceable hours it will require. Instead of saying yes to invitations and opportunities simply because we can afford them financially, we consider whether they deserve the time and energy that we can never get back. The Stoic approach to time mastery begins with conducting what Marcus Aurelius called an honest audit of how you actually spend your hours, not how you think you spend them or how you wish you spent them. This requires tracking your activities for several days or weeks to identify patterns that might surprise you. Many people discover they're spending far more time on certain activities than they realized, while investing far less time in their stated priorities than they believed. This awareness exercise often reveals what Epictetus would have called wretched habits that develop gradually over time until they consume significant portions of our days without providing proportional value or satisfaction. These might include checking email compulsively throughout the day, getting drawn into online arguments with strangers, watching television shows that don't actually entertain or inform us, or spending excessive time on routine tasks that could be streamlined or eliminated entirely. The next step involves applying Marcus Aurelius's essential question to every significant activity in your schedule. Am I afraid of death because I won't be able to do this anymore? This thought experiment quickly reveals which activities are truly meaningful to you and which ones you're doing out of habit, social pressure, or lack of conscious intention. Most people discover that they would feel perfectly comfortable dying before completing many of the tasks that currently consume their time and attention. Seneca taught that effective time management isn't primarily about efficiency techniques or productivity systems, although these tools can be helpful. The foundation of time mastery is clarity about what you consider genuinely important in your life, followed by the discipline to align your daily choices with those priorities. Without this philosophical foundation, even the most sophisticated time management methods become ways of doing unimportant things more efficiently. This clarity requires regular reflection about your core values, your most meaningful relationships, your creative aspirations, and your contributions to causes larger than yourself. These reflections help you distinguish between activities that move you toward the kind of person you want to become and the kind of life you want to create, versus activities that simply fill time without contributing to your deeper purposes. The practical implementation involves what the Stoics would call guarding your time, with the same vigilance you would use to protect any other precious resource. This means developing the ability to say no to time requests that don't align with your essential priorities, even when those requests come from people you care about or opportunities that seem attractive on the surface. Marcus Aurelius understood that time consciousness also requires accepting responsibility for the choices you make about how to spend your hours. Instead of feeling like a victim of circumstances or other people's demands, you recognize that every moment offers you options about where to direct your attention and energy. Even in challenging situations, you retain the freedom to choose your attitude, your focus, and your response. Epictetus contributed the insight that most of our time anxiety comes from trying to control outcomes that depend on factors beyond our influence, while neglecting the aspects of time that are completely within our power. We cannot control how long we will live, how quickly time passes, or what interruptions and delays we will encounter. However, we have complete control over our priorities, our choices about how to respond to circumstances, and our commitment to using whatever time we have for purposes that reflect our values. Essentially, mastering your time means recognizing that how you spend your hours is how you spend your life, and that conscious, intentional choices about your daily activities are actually choices about the kind of person you become and the legacy you create during your brief time on Earth. You now possess the same 8 daily habits that enabled Marcus Aurelius to govern an empire with wisdom, helped Seneca maintain inner peace while advising a tyrant, and allowed Epictetus to find freedom even within the constraints of slavery. These aren't theoretical concepts or abstract philosophical ideas, but practical tools that have been tested across 2 millennia of human experience and proven effective in every conceivable circumstance. Consider how these habits work together to create a complete system for mastering your life. When you own less, you worry less about protecting and maintaining possessions that drain your energy. When you break destructive habits, you reclaim the freedom to choose your responses rather than being controlled by compulsions. When you turn conflicts into growth opportunities, you transform your most challenging relationships into sources of wisdom and character development. As you protect your mind from digital chaos, you create mental space for clear thinking and peaceful reflection. When you learn to say no like a Stoic, you guard your essential time for activities that truly matter to your deepest values and aspirations. Through daily spiritual cleansing practices, you process each day's experiences consciously rather than allowing stress and negativity to accumulate unconsciously in your psyche. Your connection with nature provides instant access to perspective and renewal whenever you feel overwhelmed by human complexity and artificial pressures. Finally, mastering your relationship with time transforms every hour from something that happens to you into something you actively choose to invest in creating the person you want to become. The beautiful truth about these ancient practices is that they require no special equipment, expensive training, or dramatic lifestyle changes. You can begin implementing any of these habits today, regardless of your current circumstances, living situation, or personal challenges. They work equally well whether you live in a Manhattan studio apartment or a suburban house in Phoenix, whether you're starting your career or approaching retirement, or whether you're naturally introverted or extroverted. What these habits do require is the same commitment to daily practice that you already bring to brushing your teeth, checking your email, or any other routine that you've made non-negotiable in your life. The Stoics understood that character development and life mastery happen through small, consistent choices repeated over time rather than through dramatic moments of inspiration or major life overhauls. Start with whichever habit resonates most strongly with your current challenges and needs. Perhaps you feel overwhelmed by possessions and need to begin with physical decluttering. Maybe you're struggling with a destructive habit that's stealing your freedom and energy. You might feel weighed down by unresolved conflicts or bombarded by negative information that corrupts your peace of mind. The specific starting point matters less than your commitment to begin somewhere and maintain consistency over time. As you develop competence and confidence with one habit, you'll naturally find opportunities to integrate the others into your daily routine until all 8 become as automatic as any other aspect of your personal care and development. These practices will transform not only your external circumstances, but your entire relationship with life itself. You'll discover the profound satisfaction that comes from living according to timeless principles rather than reacting to temporary pressures. You'll experience the deep peace that emerges when your daily actions align with your deepest values and aspirations. If this video has provided value for your journey toward a more intentional and fulfilling life, please subscribe to the Stoic Vivu channel where we explore practical applications of ancient wisdom for modern challenges. Like this video to help others discover these transformative habits, and share it with anyone who might benefit from learning how the greatest minds in history mastered the art of living well. Your engagement helps us continue creating content that brings timeless wisdom into contemporary life, one habit at a time.